In this video, we're going to validate the EAN given in the URL. Hi, I'm Mark Bradley and welcome to Testing All the Things, a screencast in which we use live coding to demonstrate different types of testing tools and techniques. In this episode, we're going to finish off with our get endpoint for books. We're going to ensure that the EAN given in the URL is valid. Let's look at the code. In the previous episode, we have test-driven out the implementation of a GetBook endpoint for our API, starting with some end-to-end tests that drove out the implementation and made it all work in our main function. In the last video, we added some functionality that required us to move our database interaction into its own space. Let's have a quick look through what we've got already. Starting with our main, we have a book get handler which takes a book retriever. So if we look into our handler, this gets the ISBN from the URL and then requests the book based on the ISBN given. And it handles any errors coming back and outputs some JSON to describe the error, or it takes the book and outputs the book as JSON. Looking into our book retriever, there's an interface which is implemented by our retriever here, which takes the ISBN and connects to an SQL database to get the book and to get the data about the book. If it can't find a row, it returns a book not found error, and if any other error occurs, it returns a failed to retrieve book error. So far this is a nice clean implementation, but we want to add some validation to the incoming ISBN. So if we go back through our code a bit, we'll start here. This code is about the retrieval of the book from the database, putting it into a struct and either returning that struct with the values or returning an error that tells us why it didn't work. So this isn't the place we should really be validating an ISBN from. Now if we go to our GetBook Handler, this bit of code here is all about handling HTTP requests and responses. Now the logic of whether an ISBN is valid or not should also not sit here. So it suggests there needs to be something that sits between our database code and our HTTP code to do some additional business logic. So that's the way we're going to go with that today, but we're also going to drive that out with tests. Let's make a start. Close all the code, and we'll start with an end-to-end test. It will be similar to our book does not exist test. We don't need to create anything in the database because we're not going to get to that layer. Let's put it here. So we'll create a new test. Book suite, and we'll call it get book with invalid EAN. There we go. So we can do a quick copy paste job here. So for the simplification of this code, we're going to say that a ISBN is just a numeric string. It can't contain alphabetical characters. So we shall put a C in there. That then becomes invalid. That's our setup for our test. We now need to make sure our assertions are correct. So we don't want a not found anymore because that's not correct. It's a different type of user error. So we'll say status, and we'll use bad request. Okay. It's a bad request. We want a different error number. I think we're up to 3. We'll say ISBN is invalid. So that's our test set up. Let's run our tests and see what happens. We'll go make test. And our test has failed. Let's go and look at what's happened. Instead of the 400 we expected, we got a 404. This is happening because the book we're asking for doesn't exist in our database. So it's acting as if it's a 404. So we need to go into our code and make some changes so that we can validate the ISBN and return when it's not valid. Let's start by looking at the unit tests of our handler. Our handler has a number of tests. that handle unexpected exceptions, when the book is found, and when the book is not found. We now need to make a case where we have an invalid EAN. And as we discussed at the start of the video, we don't want the HTTP layer to be responsible for this. The only access we have to this currently is the interface we define next to our handler, which is the GetBook interface. One of the errors that currently returns is a book not found error. So let's write a new test where we're getting an invalid EAN error. Go to the bottom of our tests. Let's put it above the unexpected one, because that's probably the last one we want. So put it in here. New test. Get book suite. Book when providing invalid ISBN. Take our mock. Here. So make it clear, we'll say that there's an invalid ISBN. So we'll go, in fact, it doesn't matter because it's using the mock setup above. So when it's called that, then it's going to return an error. And now we want to define that error. So we'll go back here. So book not found error. So we'll go error invalid ISBN. Pause. Errors new. SBN is invalid. So that's the one we're going to return. Is that what we're doing? Just double checking. Yeah, that one there. Okay. So that's our error we're expecting. We call our handler, run the code, and then we go to our body. Let's just do a quick copy and paste job here again. So as we said previously, we need to be a bad request, error number 2, and we'll just get the text correct. ISBN invalid. There we go. I made a mistake here. It should be called ISBN. That says that. Okay. And now we'll run this set of unit tests quickly, rather than running all of them, because we know our end-to-end test still won't pass. Our test is failing as we expect it to, and how it's failing is we're expecting a 400 error, and we're getting a 500, and we are currently getting told it's an error that we don't really know much about. If we move our implementation over to the right, let's change our implementation so that it works as we expect. We'll go else if error is error invalid ISBN. Bring this down. So the error code is 3. It's different. We can actually get rid of the. So take the message from our test. And if not found, it's status bad request. So rerun the test through our handler. Okay. Try again. And our tests are all green. So that's the HTTP side of the implementation done. So let's move on to looking at the business logic side of things. In our book folder, we currently have a retriever test. So over here, and we have our retriever implementation. There, tidy up a bit. Right. Okay. Now we currently have a retriever that is accessing our database. Now we don't want to put this business logic into our database code because this code is responsible for saving into the database. It shouldn't be responsible for the validation of things. that needs to sit somewhere else. So we're going to do a little refactor, and then we'll go to implement the business logic. The refactor's small, we're just going to change the name of the files. So if we change it, we can do this as a DB retriever. That adds it to the test as well. So we're kind of separating this off. So this is a database retriever. And what we'll do now to keep it reasonably straightforward for this implementation is our business logic retrieving code will implement the same interface. It will return a book and an error, and it will take an ISBN. We'll just implement that same interface and add the business logic there for now. So now we're going to create a new test file. Test. And we'll add a new implementation file. Let's make a start on our first test for this. I would suggest the easiest way to go about this, for now, have this retriever return any errors from the retriever it's given straight, without modifying them or doing anything with them or understanding them. This might change later, but for now this is probably the simplest thing we can do. Create a new suite. So we'll call it retriever suite. That's going to be a duplicate, so let's quick refactor here. So that's Shift F6, B retriever suite, do refactor. Okay, and then we'll come back here and that is not DB retriever. That does that, and then we just need to do there. We're ready to write our first test. So test. Error. Retriever. Error. We need a mock to work with. We have one that's currently here. So what we'll do quickly to make things work, so we'll just copy this in. So now we can start setting things up. So we need a book retriever. So that's a new mock book retriever. And br.on GetBook ISBN return. Send a book is return our book. No values, and we're going to turn error. Well, let's actually create an error. So, and that's what we'll return. So now we want so look at this DB retriever. I think that's going to have a new retriever. So let's new DB retriever. There we go. Okay, and we'll move on. Book.new retriever. Which will take the book retriever as an argument, and then it's actually Shift F6 MBR mock one. There we go. BR that BR dot get book. Is it get book? Yep. We give the ISBN. So we know this returns a book which we don't care about because it's going to be an error. Oh. And now we can go s.expect error. Oh, hang on. Expected error. That was just the errors there. And want to check that the error is the expected error. So we just want it to pass through. There we go. Okay. So that was the test all set up. Run it, but at the moment we've got some red, so we'll let our IDE tell us the test won't pass for now. We need let's go and check the naming of this. I bet it's called, F6. I'll call this the DB retriever. Type retriever. Struct br retriever. So we need then we get this to implement book retriever. So we return book and nil. Hopefully this should all go green, so it will now run. We'll run this test. Yeah, you get that. Run all the tests in this suite. So we expected an error, we got nil, and it didn't expect. So simplest thing for this to do so far to pass will be r.br.getBook ISBN. So we'll save that, run it. In fact, what we could do to be really good, do this. That will force us to write another test. Return book error. There we go. Try it again. So now we need to do another test where the retrieval is successful. J test retrieve suite. So test take this setup. In fact, I don't need that. Take just this bit. Now, return no error. I'm just going to return the book. Move this out to a variable. Book, and we'll just set one value. Set the ISBN to be so. And now we want the book. So we expect no error to be returned, and the books to match. So the expected book to match the returned book. And we run those tests. Okay, so we're not getting the error, that's good, but we're not getting the same book back. Now this is a quick fix. Let's do this. We just can do return. so. So we now get the book and the error back from our database retriever. So we'll run that. And now we need to test for handling invalid ISBNs. So new test. So we're not going to expect that to be called, so we don't need to do anything with that. We'll just create the mock. So pass it into our book retriever. This. Not going to get a book back. We'll put a C slap bang in the middle, and we can expect an error and equal invalid. So run our test. The invalid one. So currently we're getting a panic, and that's because the mock's being called when it's not expecting to be called. How are we going to do this? So we quickly need to identify this. So we can use some regular expressions. So regular match string, perfect. And that's a pattern, and it's the ISBN we want to match. And this returns an error and a ball. Well, let's just so we'll go B, no, equals, and error. Ignore for now, and we need to do some matching. So I think it starts with, it needs to be numbers and just numbers. Okay, so if not B, return book rest. Oh no, wrong one. There we are. Save. Okay, so that should be it. And now we've got this unhandled error. I don't think, we can go and look at it, but I don't think whatever we pass in here will cause an error. I think the errors are only caused by the pattern not matching. So let's have a quick look, just to make sure. So it compiles, if error, return match string, which just returns a bool and a nil. So yes, so only if the regular expression that we pass doesn't compile will we get an error. Now, this is hard-coded in our code, so I'm not going to write a test for this error case because I can't test it, and I'm not going to handle the error either because I can't test it. I have this which is working, it works as I expect it. I'm not going to handle this error on the case that this doesn't work. So that's that complete. I think we're now in a point where we can start to tie everything together in our main and run our end-to-end tests again. So let's do that. If we open our main, so we have our database retriever. So we'll quickly rename this to DB retriever. And then we're going to have a retriever, which is a book new retriever, which takes our DB retriever. And then we'll pass our retriever in here. So, okay. So hopefully now if we run all of our tests, we're back to a point of green. So let's try that. And our tests are all passing. That piece of functionality to validate the ISBN is now complete. But we've got a little bit of a mess I think it would be worth cleaning up before we finish. So what I'd like to do is if we have our retriever, which takes a book retriever. I'm not overly keen on reusing that interface. So I think this retriever should have its own retriever, define its own interface it's going to use, and we can quickly refactor and rename probably our database retriever to something different. Let's have a go at that. So we're going to create a new interface. So type, we'll call it Book Finder. Interface. Now it's going to be pretty similar to GetBook, but just to make, let's call find, let's quick find book by, and then ISBN. That looks quite nice. It returns a book still and returns errors. That works quite nicely. And then we can say that the book, this now is takes a book finder. That interface is now defined at this level. It's going to say find book. That still works. Okay. And then this will now take a book finder. And we can do a quick refactor. Let's just make that F. There we go. Okay. So that's our refactor there to the interface, and we can quickly fix our tests by making this implement the new interface. Book. So it's find book, and then this should be find book. It should be find book. So let's just check that still works. Which it does. So that quick refactor has worked, and we'll also change now the implementation of our retriever here. So let's say this is now, if we do Shift F6, that is now find book by. Do the refactor, so that's changed these ones nicely. And if we look at the DB retriever, that's changed, and that now implements the finder interface which we've defined next to our retriever. So that looks really nice. We'll just do a quick refactor now, and we'll just call this the DB. It's just to do with the database. Okay. So that refactor hopefully is now complete, and all our tests should still pass. A little bit of renaming. So we'll just do that, make tests, and run them all. And our tests have completed. So that's the implementation of our GetBook by ISBN endpoint completed. In the next video, we'll look through the code we've created and the architecture we've given our code. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching this episode of Testing All the Things. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please rate and review the video and subscribe to the channel. If you did not and you have any feedback, please leave a comment in the comment section of the video or contact me on Twitter @Bradle.